Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you're calling from. We're really happy that you were able to join us today. I think you'll find the content that both Nate and Jonathan are going to be presenting is going to definitely bring some value and help everybody out. So while everybody's getting settled, if you want to drop in the chat where you're calling from, that would be awesome. So we can just see where all of you are calling from. And we're just going to launch a few polls. And again, this we'll be getting really fully started in the next couple of minutes, but we're going to launch some polls. So hopefully you can give us some time. So the first poll: do you feel that these technical workshops will be beneficial to you?
I think this is when we need that Jeopardy music in the background.
I'm not very good at it. I got a face for radio. All right, we're going to close that poll off. Looks like we've got a fair amount of votes on that already. So 97% are think that the 30-minute workshops are going to be very beneficial to them. Okay, so our next poll would be, what are you currently installing for your all-in-one panels? So you can select all that apply. All right, we're going to close that poll. 91% installing IQ2 Plus, and then 15–16% for our competitors out there. That's awesome, 91%. All right, next one. So when you're installing your IQ2s, what is your preferred secondary keypad? Is it IQ Remote, the PowerG secondary keypad, or you do not use secondary keypad?
And we'll actually spend a little bit of time talking about those different options here in just a minute.
All right. 52% IQ Remote and 37% for the PowerG secondary keypad. So just a couple more polls. Very easy. Did you attend last week's workshop on the IQ Hardwire PowerG module? Interesting split. So about 55% attended last week's session. We strongly encourage you to attend all of our sessions, but we're happy you're here. So 2 more left, nice easy. What panels would you like us to focus on for future technical workshops? So more on IQ2 Plus, some stuff on PowerSeries Pro or PowerSeries Neo. And we'll close that poll. So definitely, a lot of interest in some more IQ2 Plus seminars, and a pretty good mix of PowerSeries Neo and Pro. So rest assured, we're taking that feedback. And our last one before we're going to pass you off to Nate and Jonathan. Here we go. When you're installing your IQ remotes, do you also install your own security-only Wi-Fi network? So are you creating a parallel network for your security devices? All right, we'll close that one. So Nate, about a quarter are installing a parallel network for their security devices. So I'm going to turn my camera off and pass this off to you. Good luck, and we'll be sure to interrupt if we have any questions.
All right, I appreciate that, Neil. So just all those who have joined us today, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedules. I'll introduce myself here, and I'll let Jonathan introduce himself. here in just a second. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nathan Anderson. I work or started actually here just over a year ago working for Qualsys right before the merger with JCI. So we're pretty excited about the JCI merger. It gives us a little more bandwidth to do more, deliver more, and create better solutions for you and for your customers. And really, that's what these technical webinars are about. We want to, be very specific, be very deliberate on the way that we present and train, answer your questions. Now, IQ Remote is one of those topics that we've seen a lot of buzz around, on the forums, on the Facebook feeds, and what have you. So we thought it was relevant to spend a little bit of time talking about that today. So, and I've got with me today Jonathan Jennings. Jonathan, say hello.
Hey, everybody. Technical area manager down in the Southeast. I'm a DSC legacy employee. I've been with them for, I think it's almost 6 years now, and I have to actually go look at HR, but the time has really flown by. It's been great. It was funny, back when DSC first bought into the Qualsys panel, I was one of the ones, back then we were called something else, and went to San Jose, and I was so excited about the panel in the Gen 1, and the Gen 2 is just so much better, and I'm really excited to be here and hope everybody learned something today.
Awesome, thanks, Jonathan. So to kick us off, I thought I would spend a little bit of time talking about some of the current keypad options. So today's webinar, we're really going to focus in on the IQ Remote. That's the image that you see here to my left. We're currently on our 3rd generation IQ Remote. There are some limitations with this device. One of the main limitations is you can only pair up to 3 of these with each IQ panel. And they do communicate over Wi-Fi, so we'll spend some time talking about some of the limitations with Wi-Fi, some best practices as it relates to IQ Remote as well. The second option that we currently have available is this device that looks and is branded as a DSC product. This is a great solution for an area that you just need simply to arm or disarm the security panel. And we threw up there the part number of that product. It's the WS9 LCD WF9. So you can pair up to 5 of those with each one of our IQ panels. Jonathan, did you want to quickly review how to pair an IQ panel with an IQ remote here?
It's really funny you say that, because I literally had to do this last night. So I got to pair mine back in. My Wi-Fi was down for a while, so it was one of those things where I got to pair it back in. So it was a nice refresher class for me. So the big thing to do is, A, you got to be sure you got your Qualsys panel up and working, okay? I have taken a tech call that somebody couldn't get theirs to learn in, and the main panel was down. So, FYI on that one. So what you want to do is be sure you power up the device. The power button's going to be on that right-hand side. You're going to press it. They say, press it and count to 3. I'm from Alabama, so sometimes 3 is a little hard for me to count to. So I wait for the red light to come on. I just count to 2. I just keep it really simple for me. Next, you're going to go is you actually need to activate it on Wi-Fi, and you want to find the correct Wi-Fi network you want to be on. That's extremely important. If you have like a router from your ISP, your internet service provider, and I know I'm just going to use Spectrum as an example because I've got a lot of experience with Spectrum. You want to be sure you're on the right one and not your neighbors, okay? My father-in-law was trying to put his on his neighbors, so we had a little difficulty with there. I had to walk him through it. So just keep that in mind. You got to be sure you're on the proper network. You're going to go into the panel, and at step 3, I love how this is beautifully laid out, Nate. I got to give you a big shout out on that one. I really like how you just step right through the icons here. Get into touching the cordless drill there, touch devices. Of course, it's a Wi-Fi device. Again, that secondary touchscreen is going to be connected to that main panel through Wi-Fi, and that's how it's going to get all its information. You'll touch IQ Remote's touch pair. You'll then go back to the secondary touchscreen itself. Touch pair there. Again, they're on the same network. They're just going to see each other. And the way I look at it is, I look at it as if I am on a boat out there that's sending us a stress signal. You know, it's just sending the signal, and I'm waiting for somebody to hear that distress signal. And that's kind of how these two things kind of pair up to each other. It's saying, hey, I'm over here, and the main panel says, oh, I got you, you're right there, and it's going to go ahead and pair itself up.
Yeah, no, it's also very important to make sure that you're on the latest, greatest version of firmware. So with these later versions of firmware, we've actually released a ton of updates. So 252, really a bunch of enhancements. We typically release a version of firmware, one of two reasons, or maybe a combination of the two reasons, either for a new feature. You know, we're trying to make the product better in every way, or maybe there's a bug that we've located and we found that there's maybe a different way to resolve that bug, and we'll put those in a newer version of firmware. So just for reference, all of our versions of firmware, we do release what's called a TSB, a technical support bulletin on the dealer website there. So any version of firmware that we release, you know, we'll list out all the reasons for that update. Now with 253, there was a setting in there that we updated that will help the IQ remotes and the IQ panel communicating back to the Wi-Fi network name or the SSID, and that's called PMF. We reference it in the TSB if you wanted to go and read up more on that. But basically, for some of these newer networks that support like Wi-Fi 6 as an example, that PMF setting is fairly important. So any chance you get to update to a newer version of firmware, we highly recommend it. So I've got a little section here to the right on this slide that shows you where to find those software updates from the panel. So once I've paired my remote to my IQ panel, you know, I'd go navigate the settings, advanced settings, enter my dealer code or my installer code, and then I just go right down to the software update. Now, once the IQ panel has updated, and if an IQ remote is connected, once that IQ remote and that IQ panel communicate right after that update, it will automatically send the update over to the IQ remote. At least that's how it's designed. So definitely one of those first steps that we would recommend that you look at when pairing you know, these products together.
Alrighty. So on a Wi-Fi network, there's typical two bands that you're going to see, especially in residential homes now. And you'll see 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz. And of course, 5 gigahertz, we got all this bandwidth to play with, right? So if I'm got that nice brand new 4K television, I want to be sure it's going to look really crisp and clean for the Super Bowl that's coming up. I want to be sure that we've got that, and you know, maybe at a 5K setting. Best case practice, you want to put the Qualsys panel and the IQ secondary remote on 2.4. The advantages of 2.4 is you can definitely see here by the graphic, you get much better range. So I can actually have these two devices much further apart from each other. If I'm selecting it to be in the 2.4 range, it's not going to be bouncing back and forth in between 5 and 2.4 and 5 and 2.4. And I don't know if you've ever seen that with your cell phone or something like that, or a tablet walking around the house, that once I get to a certain age, maybe I get past the kitchen and this thing will start kind of bouncing back and forth, because it's always, your device is always trying to find the best bandwidth to be on for the application that you're using or the location you are closest to the router itself. So it's going to be best to put that, instead of that band steering back and forth, go ahead and lock it down on 2.4. You're going to have much better results moving forward.
Yeah, and like
anything I'm missing there, Nate?
Well, you know, the only other thing that I would mention, you know, like you've already said or referred to it, you know, as you were talking there, comparing 2.4 to 5 gigahertz, really 2.4 is perfect for what we're trying to do with our panel and the communication that we use in order to communicate back to the IQ remote. right? We're not doing anything crazy. We're not streaming HD video content from the panel over to the IQ remote. So 2.4 is going to work just fine. We don't need that 5 gigahertz, which was really designed for more bandwidth, right? So there's also something called band steering, and Jonathan, you did a great job explaining that we want to lock it down to 2.4. If there's any chance that you can get logged into your customer's network, maybe you're setting up the network yourself as a parallel network to the customer's existing network. You know, band steering is a setting that you're going to hear and see more of. There's really no IEEE standard for band steering. You know, so a Linksys branded access point or router might do it a little bit differently than say like a Netgear Nighthawk, because there is again no IEEE standard for band steering. But what band steering is trying to do is it's trying to force everything over to 5 gigahertz and try to optimize 5 gigahertz. So we want to disable that. We want to enable 2.4 where we can, really to get that range that we need, you know, for these devices to communicate with one another. One of the other recommendations or best practices, we actually have a document also located on our knowledge base on the Qualsys website. And this is, you know, one of the steps. So we've got it broken down into 4 steps. I think this is step 3. You know, as far as best practices go, we talk a lot about MAC address reservation. Really what that is it's a static IP that's being managed by the router. And a lot of the feedback that we've gotten since we put this documentation out there is, hey, I'm just not comfortable logging into the customer's router and setting up a reservation. Or maybe it's just I'm a little afraid to venture out and try to figure this out, because you know, every router is going to be different. They might call it MAC IP reservation. They might call it a static IP right there in the router, or something else, right? But as a good rule of thumb, this is still the preferred method. You know, when you're setting up a static or reserved IP for the remote and the panel. You know, really what you need to do is you need access to the customer's router, or if you're putting in your own router that you've set up in parallel to the customer's network, you log into it through what we call the web interface, right? So you need to know the gateway address. That's the IP address that the router is going to communicate on. You'll need to know a username and password, right? And then you'll need to navigate, figure out where the setting is within that device. And then once you've figured out where the setting is, from there you're basically just locking that DHCP address to that specific device. So just real quick, I thought I would explain or try to explain a little bit on what DHCP means. I know a lot of you guys out there are just now starting to get more and more familiar with how networks are set up. We're actually going to be releasing some new products later this year, one of which is a router, and our router is going to help eliminate some of these challenges that we've seen with the connectivity between the IQ panel and the IQ remote, at least we hope. But the idea is to give you more management capabilities within that device, very specific to our product. So DHCP, real quick, it's a range of IP addresses that the router is going to hand out automatically to devices that are jumping on and trying to get connected, right? So anything outside of that range would also be noteworthy if I'm going to set my device up as a static IP. So for example, if my DHCP range on my router is, you know, my router gateway might be 192.168.1.1 as the gateway, my DHCP range might be 192.168.1.100 through .200, right? So basically what that's saying is the router is going to be able to hand out up to 100 IP addresses effectively. So if I'm going to try to set up a static IP on my IQ remote or my IQ panel, I can do that when I go in and I first set it up to connect to a Wi-Fi SSID or network name. So when I go in there, I've got a couple of options. A little screenshot here. You've got the option to show password, or there's an option here with a checkbox that says Advanced Options. If you click on that Advanced Options checkbox, it will allow you to scroll down, and you'll have this IP settings section, and it will default to DHCP. But again, if you want to manage this from the device rather than through the router, you can go in and select static, and it will prompt you to enter in a manual IP address. So a couple things here to know. In order to set up a static IP, you need to understand what the range is, because you want to set that static IP address outside of that range. And you would also need to know what the gateway IP address is. So, back to our original example, if the gateway was 192.168.1.1 and our DHCP range was 192.168.1.100 through .200, our static IP that we might want to set on the panel might be 192.168.1.201, and the IP address that we might want to set up on the IQ remote might be 192.168.1.3, just as an example, or 2.
Hey Nate, we have a great question here. So, do you recommend setting up a parallel Wi-Fi network for the system?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually we're going to cover that in this next slide, which is actually a great segue for Jonathan.
And I was like, man, this is working out perfect.
It's perfect.
It is. So this is a great scenario. In my house, I actually put in a Euro Wi-Fi network many years ago because I was trying to overcome an issue that I had trying to update a Wi-Fi device in my house. So so I put this network up. I got all the computers and the Wi-Fi printer, and of course, the game system. Oh my gosh, tablets. My daughter's stuff, her friend's stuff all come over, and I've got this beautiful Wi-Fi network that sits there and it runs and it's great. So when I decided to bring in the Qualsa system into my house, I'm sitting there looking at going, I was like, ooh, I got a lot of stuff over here on this network. Do I really want to share this information that maybe not everybody needs to look at or be able to see? Maybe I'd like to have a lockdown private network that's parallel to it, and that's what I decided to do. So I've got the IQ Wi-Fi in my house, which literally has the main panel, the secondary remote. I have an alarm.com camera and the new doorbell, and it's all on the separate network that's all looked out after independently of my primary network that I say all my devices, the stuff that a customer actually cares about working, right? So if little Johnny's PlayStation or his Xbox, that thing's got to work, right? It's got to be on the network. And I wanted mine to be separate, so those two networks basically can't interfere with each other. So they're on completely different IP addresses. It's just another parallel network that I can manage so much easier all my security devices and not have to worry about, the customer's, iPad or something not being able to connect, and you getting the phone call in the middle of the night going, oh my God, it's the end of the universe. The game console's gone down, right? Little Johnny's freaking out and he's putting holes in the wall, right? Yeah, so it's a nice way to have that second run. What? What'd you say, Nate?
Oh, I just said, yeah, that never happens. Do anything you want to me, but don't disrupt my internet service, right?
Yeah, exactly. So to me, it was a perfect scenario for me to be able to have those two different things, and they can be managed completely different of each other. And I know a lot of security guys are really hesitant about touching a network and stuff. So building a parallel network might be a really good answer where you can do it and you're not touching their other stuff. Because I know the other scenario is like, hey, my internet went out. You were the last person to touch it. You were here 3 weeks ago. It's your fault, right? And I know a lot of guys don't want to go down that pathway, and building that parallel network, it kind of buffers you a little bit from that.
Yeah, and
gents, we got another good question. So based on the slide with the IQ remotes and the wire-free keypads, you did indicate you could have three of the IQ remotes and 5 of the PowerG keypads. What's the limit? Can you actually have 3 of the IQ remote and 5 PowerG in the same system?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so when you think about user interfaces, really the limitation would be about 8, right? So it would be a combination And really, it would be kind of like a hybrid system at that point. So you could harness the power of PowerG with that LCD keypad and add those wireless keypads. Essentially, is what they are. Yeah, the IQ remote. Great question.
Hey, can you put those on different partitions?
You can. Yeah, that's actually a great question too. So at least I know with the IQ remote, you can put the IQ remote on a separate partition. The limitation there is once it's learned in on that partition, it's going to stay on that partition, right? So on the main IQ panel, you'll have the or the ability to go in with a 4 or 6 digit code, depending on how you have it set up. And it will allow you to select what partition you want to arm or disarm or have visibility to. But with the IQ remote, you don't have that opportunity or that option yet. So just keep that in mind. If you are going to learn that IQ remote in, it's going to be locked to whatever partition it's been learned in as.
Yeah, and the same rule would apply to the PowerG keypads too.
Yeah. Any other questions, Neil?
We have a question that, can you pick an IP address outside of the router DHCP range?
Yes, absolutely. So that's ultimately what I'm trying to explain. So if you are going to go into the IQ remote or the IQ panel and give it a static IP from the device, from the IQ remote or the panel, yeah, you'd want to make sure that it was outside that DHCP range. What you don't want to do is you don't want to set that IP address within that DHCP range, because ultimately you could have what are called IP conflicts. So if some other device comes onto that network and the router hands out the same address that you've assigned to the IQ remote or the IQ panel, that's where those problems would exist. So great question. Great follow-up.
Hey, Nate.
Question. Yeah.
Are we finding that end users are having separate their Wi-Fi network separated yet, or is this sort of new?
When you say separate Wi-Fi networks, what
parallel?
Yeah, parallel. Yeah, it's interesting. We thought maybe if we were to put like a percentage of installs out there of dealers or installers that actually use a separate network and set it up in parallel to an existing network, we thought that the percentage might be closer to around 15%, but it sounds like it's more like 50%. So it's becoming more and more popular. And I would suggest that it's becoming more and more popular because the installer really wants more controllability, right? They want more control over that private security network. Everything is becoming more and more connected. It's actually a kind of a funny topic. My wife and I moved into our home that we're living in now about 2 years ago, and even our appliances now want to be connected to the internet. So more and more things are becoming more and more connected. The world of IoT devices, the Internet of Things, and it's happening in the world around us, and really we have an opportunity here with the security market to do the same thing, whether it's a garage door, IQ remote, the things that we're talking about today, or cameras, and I think it's just going to continue to go that direction.
Hey Nate, we got we're getting close to the end of our time here, but we do have a question about not necessarily about pairing remotes, but about the settings. So is there a way to set up a timer or something for when, if you have a low battery or trouble to go off, that the low battery indicator or sound, doesn't go off at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, there is a setting on the panel. It would be under screensaver. I'm just looking here on my panel. Where is it? Yeah, photo frame is what it's called actually. So there is a setting icon there under photo frame, and it would be called nighttime mode. So with nighttime mode, you've got some additional settings there. They're customized display settings for voice and chimes. Yeah, so if you had installed the IQ remote, just as an example, in the bedroom, you probably don't want the photo frame going all night long, you know, because it's going to illuminate the room quite a bit. So great question. Definitely something that you'd want to go and enable and maybe look at those times so that they were acceptable to the customer. So we had really just one other slide here. You know, when all else fails, Jonathan was talking about setting up a private security network. Really, it's a network in parallel to the customer's existing network. There is an option on the panel where you can turn the IQ panel on as its own separate access point. And it has what's called a DHCP range as well. I think by default it supports up to 50 DHCP addresses. So it's more like, think of this setting as like a hotspot mode on like your Wi-Fi phone, right? Your connected device, right? There are some limitations with it. It's a great tool to kind of have in your back pocket for maybe you are working in a home that doesn't have any people living in it yet, right? Maybe there's a vertical there with the builder community where they want to have a IQ panel and an IQ remote, but there's no Wi-Fi network to connect to. So you could enable this access point right in the IQ panel and effectively connect your IQ remote right directly to it. A lot of guys will actually utilize this feature too to connect all their security devices. So I thought we would spend just a little bit of time talking about that feature and just kind of remind everybody about the feature, but also mention too that it's really only intended to work like a hotspot, you know, so maybe 25, 30 feet at most. So if you've got a larger project, you know, this really wouldn't be a setting that you would want to leave enabled, if that makes sense. So, but definitely something that we have built into the current product to be well aware of. So was there any other question, Neil, that came in that you felt like we ought to cover before we end?
No, I don't think so. Joel, did you see anything?
Nothing. No, I mean, there's a lot of questions, guys, but there's just a lot of it being answered here in the background. I do think, based on some of these questions, I think it would be great for us to have maybe a networking 101 course down the road. Some of these questions I think are would be perfect for something like that. Yeah, so, you know, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I'll just mention it again here as we're closing up. We are getting ready to release a Gen 1 router. We're going to call it IQ Wi-Fi. It's going to support Wi-Fi 5 right out of the box, and it's going to support Wi-Fi mesh. So very similar to Jonathan, your mesh that you had bought, you know, a few years ago. But the idea here, guys, is we want to give you guys a solution that you could actually manage from the IQ panel, and that's pretty exciting. So you won't have to open up a laptop. It will definitely have a web interface for some what I would call advanced settings. But, you know, simple things like editing an SSID or editing a password for the access point, you know, extending a network. Oftentimes we hear that installers have a hard time getting a wireless camera to connect, or maybe it's that wireless doorbell and the access point on the panel just isn't strong enough, you know, to get to those devices. So we'll definitely be spending a lot more time talking about networking 101. Maybe we'll have to put together like a networking 101 course. But you'll likely get a bit of information, a bit more information as we get ready to launch that product. And if everything goes according to plan, we should see something around the 260 timeframe, which is scheduled middle of next month. So
we're pretty excited about that. You know, anything else you wanted to mention, Jonathan?
I'd like to thank everybody for their time. Yeah, I know I had myself on mute because I'm trying to be good. I've got the IQ Wi-Fi in my house with an agent, and it has really worked well. I'm really impressed.
I do as well, and I've been thoroughly impressed with how well it works. It's very robust.
Mine came back to life after being, you know, down for a couple of days. So that was, you know, all came back up working. Everything, you know, the alarm.com cameras connected right back to it. Easy peasy, and that's the best way to be.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting place to be actually as a manufacturer, to have another solution to help solve some of these problems, some of these install challenges. So any other questions, Joel or Neil, that came in through chat that we ought to maybe spend a little more time talking about?
No, I think we've covered it, and we stayed relatively on track.
Well, good. Well, appreciate again you guys for chiming in, and thanks everybody for joining. If anybody has any additional questions as it relates, feel free to reach out anytime. You can post questions on our Facebook page. Neil, I know, spends a lot of time. Kevin, any of the guys on the team, really. We're just excited to and happy to help out where we can.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Bye.